Welcome back to the Commanders Declassified podcast, your home for all things Washington Commanders, who are now coached by none other than Dan Quinn, the coach we all said we wanted on this podcast. And to top it all off, Dan Quinn has hired Kliff Kingsbury to be his offensive coordinator. I don't think any of us saw that coming, by the way. But tonight, we are going to take you deep into each one of those individuals or gentlemen's background to tell you who they are, what they do, how they do it, and will it be successful here in Washington. We are going to kick it off tonight with one Dan Quinn, formerly of the Atlanta Falcons, formerly a Super Bowl participant. Um, let's start out with this. Mike, tell us about Dan Quinn's coaching style and what former players have said about this individual.
So his coaching style is something I actually like. Well, at least I like it. It's hands-on, very, very hands-on, based on what he said, based on what former players said. He likes to get in the. He likes to get in. He likes to really, really get into the coaching aspect of the team. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but there were former players who basically criticized him for not doing that enough because he focused so much on the personnel side. But more often than not, he likes to get really, really in your face, hands on. He keeps players very, very, very accountable. And the players seem to like it. Like Logan Paul, who mentioned when Dan Quinn was fired from Atlanta that he called him to basically ask Dan Quinn asked Logan Paul, like, hey, where did I mess up at? Where did I go wrong? And it was Logan Paul who basically, he didn't say he told him this per se, but it was Logan Paul who told him, like, a lot of personnel decisions that he personally made kind of jacked the team chemistry up, team flow up, and that kind of had a part to play in it. Then you have other former players like Matt Ryan, who coincidentally today was just talking about how much of a leader that Dan Quinn is and how much he likes to motivate players and how he keeps the players playing tough. And then I want to talk about Richard Sherman, who mentioned how brilliant of a coach Dan Quinn is and how much of a mastermind he is defensively. And Sherman said this while he was still playing for the 49ers. So it wasn't something that was recently said. This was something that was said back in the day. And if you look at Dan Quinn over the last few seasons in Dallas, you can say it's still kind of true. But the last thing I want to say that a former player said was KJ Wright, his former linebacker in Seattle. I'm pretty sure most of you remember him. If not, he was a very great, solid player for that Seattle defense. And the thing he said that I remember the most in his interviews about Dan Quinn is that Dan Quinn really, really cares about the players as men. And he talks about their family and things like that. Now, a lot of coaches might say that, and they might even care about some of their players. But the way KJ Wright was talking, it was as if Dan Quinn literally cared about every single player, not only as an NFL player, but as a man in general. So I feel like with his coaching style, what the players have said about him, and just being a man in general, knowing that you can kind of tell, I'm not even going to talk about former coaches, but you can kind of tell that they were faking it. I don't think we'll have that with Dan Quinn here. I really don't at all.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you get such profound statements from former players like Seattle, right? He was only there from 2009 to 2010 as a defensive coordinator. He was a D line coach. I'm sorry, excuse me. He was there 2013 to 2014 as a D coordinator and a D line coach 2009 through 2010. But it's not like there's this exorbitant history with Quinn in Seattle, but he left such a major impact on the Seahawks and the way that they talk about him to the point where you associate the Legion of Boom with Dan Quinn in large part, even though he wasn't there for the entirety of that era. Um, to cover his NFL coaching history, he started out with the 49ers as a defensive quality control coach, 2001 to 2002. He then got promoted to the defensive line coach for the 49ers in 2003 to 2004. After that, he was the Dolphins D-line coach 05 to 06. Then he became the Jets D-line coach 07 to 08. And then he was the Seahawks D-line coach and assistant head coach, 2009 to 2010. He then went to Florida to be the defensive coordinator there and the D-line coach. Then he got back to the NFL with the Seahawks as a D coordinator 2013 to 2014. He then went to Atlanta 2015 to 2020 as the head coach, followed by his stint in Dallas 2021 to 2023 as a D coordinator. And now he is with us. And now that he is with us, Eric, let's talk about some of the assistant coaches that he's had.
Yeah, it's a hot topic. A lot of people want to jump on the train that Kyle Shanahan kind of carried him to the early success that he had in Atlanta. And to an extent, that's true. I mean, the offense that Shanahan put together, a lot of people, I think by now most listeners and most of us have heard the stories about the staff that he had early on in Atlanta. It's very comparable. It's pretty much the same as what that legendary Washington 2013, 2014 staff looked like with, Shanahan and Mike McDaniel and Matt LaFleur, et cetera. He had those guys under him in Atlanta. Didn't have McVay, obviously didn't have O'Connell, but he had the other guys. Shanahan, and they had a ton of success. I mean, they were a top 5 offense, I think both years, top 5 in points both years. The 2016 team had just a dominant offensive season, averaged like 35 points a game, averaged over 400 yards a game. Just a really good team under Kyle Shanahan. Shanahan, of course, left, went to San Francisco after the 2016 Super Bowl season, and took McDaniel with him. LaFleur, I think, went to the Rams or Titans. I can't remember which order, but LaFleur went along with Sean McVay. But basically, Dan Quinn lost all those guys. And a lot of people think that's when the wheels fell off, but that's not exactly true, because they brought in Steve Sarkisian to replace him, kind of an outside hire. And the offense, yards-wise, still top 10. I think they were finished about 8th in the league in 2017 in yards. Points dipped, 22 points a game. So that definitely dipped. But they were back in the playoffs. They really had the Eagles on the ropes in the divisional round, and they were literally a play away from making it to the NFC Championship game. There was a drop pass in the end zone right at the end of the game on 4th down from the 1-yard line that kept them out of the NFC Championship game, propelled the Eagles there. Of course, they went on to win that Super Bowl. But the Quinn minus Shanahan was right on the doorstep of another NFC Championship appearance. The following year, still with Sarkisian, the yardage, they were still a top 10 offense in yardage. Points, they were back up to around 24 points a game, which is slightly top end of middle of the pack that year. So they were a solid offensive team. The defense wasn't the best that year, with Quinn basically calling the shots there. A lot of that had to do with Dan Quinn GM, however, because people don't always know maybe that Dan Quinn, when he came to Atlanta, he got personnel control because he was a hotshot coordinator. He was the guy coming in, and they were willing to just give him what he wanted. He wasn't the best personnel guy, kind of like what Ron was here. So some of the picks, and it's weird because some of the picks really were pretty good to start out with, like Vic Beasley, guys like that were really on point early on, and then they just kind of petered out for whatever reason. They didn't develop. I don't know what happened. Those guys never, they never took off. But the personnel decisions on defense were probably more of a problem maybe than the coaching was. But the offense was still decent even under Sarkisian for the couple of years he was there. He left, of course, to go to Alabama, at which point Quinn brought in Dirk Cotter, and that's when things kind of went off the rails. The offense really moved back towards, in 2019, was really middle of the pack in everything. They weren't great. And combining that with the defense that was kind of subpar, that's when the wheels started to come off. And then 2020 just, went to crap, again, with Dirk Cotter. Wasn't the best offensive mind, didn't fit the personnel. Also, the team got old. They kind of kept rolling back with the Julio Jones, Matt Ryan show. They didn't refresh the talent probably the way that they should. But coordinator-wise, again, losing Kyle Shanahan, of course, was a massive blow. And I don't think, what coach is going to survive losing an offensive coordinator of that quality, and the staff that he had with him at the same time. But it wasn't a complete disaster like maybe a lot of people think it was immediately. It took a few years of just poor talent influx and the core of the team getting old and moving on to really fall out. But defensively, Joe Witt has been with him. He plugged Joe Witt out, and I love that. I love the Joe Witt. We're not going to talk a ton about him tonight, but he brought Joe Witt with him to Dallas. And he's a fantastic. His dad is a legendary coach who coached at Auburn forever. Witt kind of came up underneath that. Then he moved around the league, ended up in Atlanta for a year, I think, with Quinn. Quinn brought him to Dallas as the pass game coordinator. He's really kind of like that mad scientist that really helped the careers of like guys like Trayvon Diggs. And that whole secondary that's been just elite the last couple of years, really just dominant with the takeaways and the hitting and all that kind of stuff. So if I'm like Emmanuel Forbes right now, I'm just on cloud nine to have those two guys coming with me because really great pickup defensively. And I kind of hope they can pluck Al Harris and give him like a passing game coordinator title here because he's another great defensive backs coach that's kind of still hanging out in Dallas, maybe a little bit lost now. I would love to bring him along as they fill out that staff. And of course, the Kingsbury hire, which we're going to get into, that's an interesting hire. I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about it. We'll talk more about that, but the staff decisions, kind of bit him in the end, replacing the elite guy. He replaced him with an adequate replacement. It wasn't just like he lost Shanahan and everything went to crap. That's the point I want to hammer home. They did keep things moving for a couple of years there before really falling off a cliff, and a lot of things factored into that. So I'm curious to see how this staff fills out. I love the Joe Witt, the bringing him along. I think that's a fantastic hire. And Kliff Kingsbury, I'm coming around to, but we'll certainly talk more about that as this episode progresses.
Yeah, thanks. So as I was going through sort of Dan Quinn's record, a few things really stood out to me about contributing factors to that. Eric, you touched on a lot of the data that I'm going to go through, but I'm going to go through it again here. So Dan Quinn was 43-42 in his coaching record, and your immediate reaction is, so was Ron Rivera. Not exactly, but he was very close to that. But let's dive a little bit deeper. In his first year in Atlanta, they were 21st in points per game on offense and 14th in points per game allowed on defense. They were just about even in points, 21.2 on offense, 21.6 on defense, which, I mean, good Lord, you couldn't be more 5-5 or more 500 than that. They were 8-8 that year. They got 16 games from Matt Ryan that year, 21 touchdowns, 16 interceptions. Not good enough from the quarterback position. The interceptions really hurt that team. This was during the Devontae Freeman and the Telvin Coleman era. Man, Devontae Freeman came on the scene like gangbusters that year. Roddy White, remember him? You mentioned Julio Jones. Roddy White was the A receiver in Atlanta during that time frame, right? Both of them played 16 games. Their offense just hadn't fully figured it out yet. Flip the script. Next season, they were 11-5, right? So Dan Quinn comes in. He starts to establish themselves. They're 5-5. Next year, boom, we're 11-5. They are the first or the top scoring offense in the league, 33.5 points per game on offense. They, however, were 27th in defensive scoring allowed with 27.1 points per game. So already you're like, hey, Dan Quinn's the head coach. What's going on with the defense? He's a defensive guy. We got to fix that, right? Player personnel was a problem. This is the Super Bowl that they lost that year, as Eric pointed out. That year, you got all 16 games from Matt Ryan, 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Ryan was absolutely cooking, and the offense showed for it. Freeman and Coleman combined for 1,500 yards on the ground, plus some really good numbers in the pass game. Now, it's hard for teams that lose Super Bowls to come back and be a decent team the next year. History repeats itself time and time again. But in 2017, they were 10-6. They did okay. They lost in the divisional round. Eric pointed that out as well. This is after they lost Kyle Shanahan. They were 15th in points per game at 22.1, 8th in defensive points per game allowed, with 19.7 points per game, I believe. They got 16 games from Matt Ryan. But what happened? Matt Ryan came back to the pack. He was 20 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. That's decent, but that's not Matt Ryan good when Matt Ryan was really at his elite status. Freeman missed 2 games that year, and they had the new defensive coordinator as well. 2018, 7-9. So they're starting to come back to the pack, right? They're 10th in points per game. Throughout this whole tenure, as Eric pointed out, their offense really never slipped below a top 15 offense in the league. They were 25.9 points per game. Defensively, they were 25th. They were their points per game, I forget what the number was, but Matt Ryan, again, started baking again. 35 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 16 games. Telvin Coleman took over the starting running back. Remember, Devontae Freeman, injury history, Telvin Coleman. There was always this buzz in Atlanta that Telvin Coleman was the better of the 2 running backs. They found out that was not true when Tevin Coleman took over. He was not nearly as good. 2019, they were 7-9 again. And this is when Dan Quinn really started to get into hot water in Atlanta because of all the early success. And now we're back to back below 500 teams. They had new coordinators on both sides of the ball. Dan Quinn took over the defense. The offense, 13 points per game, 23.8. They were the 23rd ranked defense, 24.9 points per game. Matt Ryan played 15 games. Freeman was back as the leading rusher, but only at 657 yards the whole season. Then the final year, they were 4-12, finished last in the NFC South. Their points, they were 16th in offense, 24.8 points per game. Their defense was 19th. So just below middle of the pack there. Raheem Morris was the defensive coordinator. Now, look, when you follow that thread through, two things are true the whole time. Number one, their defense underperformed nearly every year that he was there. He's responsible and accountable for that because of his influence on the defensive personnel picks. You can't get around that. He was elite in Seattle because he wasn't picking the groceries. He was just executing with those groceries. He was elite in Dallas because he wasn't picking the groceries. He was executing with those groceries. In DC, he's not picking any of the groceries, right? That's all Adam Peters, and that was made very clear when they hired Dan Quinn. The other thing that you want to think about here is when Dan Quinn had a running game in Atlanta that was effective, they were good. When they didn't, they weren't. And overall as a team. And of course, that also impacted Matt Ryan too. Matt Ryan benefited greatly from having Freeman just going bananas for that 2 to 3 year stretch. And then when he started to pull back, Matt Ryan started to come off of it a little bit. So there's a correlation there. And there is a correlation between how effectively you run the football and how well your defense plays, right? Because we saw that with our team. When we ran the football, what felt like almost every play in the Scott Turner, whatever year that was, 2022, I think it was, when Taylor Heineke was a quarterback, our defense was a top whatever number defense. Then we started passing the ball with EB last year, and we're like, who is this defense? Even though 90% of the players were the same, like, I don't know who these guys are. So the Dan Quinn's record is 500, but there are certainly explainable factors as to why that was, which should give you some semblance of hope that this could be different this time around because of the changes that are made, not being part of the personnel decisions, and also hopefully getting a coordinator that likes to run the football. But we're going to talk about Kliff Kingsbury right now. And as I pull up my notes on Kingsbury, let me ask you guys this first. And Mike, we'll start with you since you went first. What's your confidence level on success with Dan Quinn here?
I would say moderate, maybe a little bit higher than that. I told somebody this earlier, and I'll say it again. I think his floor is Gibbs 2.0. That's 2 playoff appearances in 4 years. I think that's his floor. And I know you might say, well, he did this and this. Like, I get it, but I really feel like hearing from this dude that he kind of understands where he messed up his first time around in Atlanta. He's been coaching in Dallas the last few years, saying how they operate may have helped him even more. Of course, we're Redskins fans or whatever, but you just got to admit that Cowboys, they have something going. Like, they stay with talent on their team. They may not be able to win a Super Bowl or make an NFC championship, but they always have a hat in the ring. So I feel like that combined with his past experience, bringing in fresher faces like Kliff Kingsbury, you can kind of tell he at least knows who a good offensive coordinator is, even if he can't keep him. He at least knows how to attract them. So, like, I really feel good about the Bama. I think it's going to be fun for the next couple of seasons around here.
I like it. Eric, where you at with the Dan Quinn hire?
I told you guys last week that I wouldn't be mad. He probably wasn't going to be my first choice as a hire, but I would not be angry at getting him, and I'm not. The fans are going to be fans and overreact and act like fools because they didn't get the guy they wanted, even though I think I've pointed this out already, but like they were ecstatic when Josh Harris bought the team. They were ecstatic when Adam Peters got hired. But like, why were you ecstatic? Because they were just going to do what you thought they were going to do, or because they know what they're doing? I mean, I trust them to know what they're doing. I think they were very comfortable with Dan Quinn throughout the entire process. And, the whole Ben Johnson thing, I don't know what happened there. There's, both sides are kind of saying their piece, and it's probably somewhere in the middle. But I don't think that Dan Quinn, it certainly wasn't a panic move. I don't think they settled. I think that they may have hired him had they gone through the entire interview process with everybody. One thing about Josh Harris is that he keeps his word, right? So he keeps his word. So he said, I'm going to interview all these guys twice. He intended to interview all of them twice. They may have already decided Dan Quinn was the guy when they were headed up to Detroit and Ben Johnson flaked out on them. Who knows? But, Dan Quinn's the hire. So I feel good about the hire. I'm fine with it. I thought his opening press conference was great. A little awkward talking about Eric Bieniemy, the way he kind of was like, yeah, he's not going to be here, but I like him. That was a little weird. That was the only really awkward part that I like. I think, I like the energy he brings.
That's seems like the one part I missed too.
Yeah, he was basically, they asked him about Bieniemy. He's like, Bieniemy's a great guy. We met today. He's a great coach. Not going to be coaching here, but he's a great coach. It was pretty funny. Yeah. Totally, it was super awkward, but it was good. But no, I'm excited. Like I said, I love that he brought Joe Witt Jr. with him. And I think that he really believes that he figured things out. He's a better coach than he was when he said that. I believe it. I think he's made progress. And the key point is he's not personnel guy. He's going to be head coach guy. He's got a defensive coordinator that he trusts to call the defense. It's going to be huge. That will allow him to be the head coach. As he said, he was very clear about that. So I'm excited about the hire. I think it can be really good. I think it's a good situation. I don't know that it's going to work out, but I think all the pieces are in place for it to be a very good situation here.
Can I interject one more thing? And this kind of backs on my first topic when I was talking about what the players said. There is one thing that KJ Wright said that I have a minor concern with. He said that the second time around that Dan Quinn should have call his plays. He should call his own defense. He's a mastermind. He should call his own defense. He said that before Dan Quinn said at his press conference that Kliff Kingsbury is going to call the offensive plays, obviously, but Joe Witt will call the defensive plays. And I guess that's something we're going to have to monitor earlier or throughout the 2024 season is how the defensive plays are looking. And if we think that Quinn may need to take over sooner rather than later, the play calling duties, but only because he's a mastermind. Of course, we know nothing about Joe Witt, absolutely nothing other than his prowess as a defensive pass schemer. That's all we know. So it's going to be interesting, like I said, but as of now, there's no reason for me not to trust them the way they've been performing in Dallas as a duo the last couple of years.
Yeah, I know that Dan Quinn knows a lot about defense, and Dan Quinn trusts Joe Witt, so I'm cool with that for right now.
Yeah. So where I'm at is, if it were just Dan Quinn, I'd probably still be somewhere in the middle of I don't know if this will be enough. I think when you add in the factor of Adam Peters and you add in Kliff Kingsbury and you add in Joe Witt, then as a collective, if they're on the same page, your chances for success are much, much higher. All right, let's talk Kliff Kingsbury, who I think is really the splash hire that a lot of fans were looking at. Let's talk about where do we want to start with this? So, Eric, talk to us about the type of QB that Kliff likes in his offensive system a little bit, will you?
I love this question. I'm glad I got it because look at the QBs that he's worked with and had success with. Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes, obviously at Texas Tech. Baker Mayfield moved on, but he was very successful at Texas Tech. Then he had Davis Mills back in the day. He had Kyler Murray in Arizona, just had Caleb Williams. What do those guys have in common? I mean, they play quarterback. That's it, right? They're all different types of quarterbacks, and he has had success with all different types of quarterbacks. I think that's fantastic. That's the one thing I am very excited about him coming in with the probability that we take a quarterback at number 2. First of all, we're going to just squash the narrative here. because I see the narrative already being built. It's just like the Ben Johnson thing, where like everybody outside of DC is automatically like focusing on they're going to move up to get Caleb Williams. They're going to do it, and it's just going to be all about what we're going to do to get Caleb Williams, and then we're not going to do it, and then it's just going to be like they failed, they sucked. I don't think that's the case at all, because obviously I think if Caleb Williams is there at 2, that's the pick. Obviously, I don't think you'd be a fool not to take that pick at 2 unless something catastrophic comes out about him and midgets or something, or whatever, before the draft. Caleb Williams is the pick. He's the best quarterback coming out, I think. But he's probably going to be gone at 1, either to Chicago or to whomever Chicago trades with. We heard, both Dan Quinn and Adam Peters talk about how important building from the lines is. That's 100. I believe that 100%. I think we keep all of our picks. I don't think we move up at all. And that's okay, because if Caleb Williams is there, that's the pick. If you have a choice between Drake May and Jayden Daniels at 2, I mean, look, Drake May has run, air raid offense at North Carolina. Phil Longo coached it. They ran it last year. He's an air raid quarterback already. He has the capability to do it. Jayden Daniels, not so much at LSU, but look at the success that Kliff Kingsbury had with like the design run plays and keeping it simple for Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray hit 800 yards rushing, I think, in 2020. That's amazing. Jayden Daniels will slide right into that. And the passing game in the air raid offense is very simplistic. Like it's the whole thing is you send everybody out and the quarterback throws it to whoever's open. It's as simple as it gets for the NFL. Now, it's not as easy as it is in college, because there's just the field's different. The hashes are closer together. The players on defense are way better. So there's adjustments you have to make for that. But in theory, it's the same thing. It's just keeping it simple and making the right throw to the guy who's open. And I think that's a great transition offense into the NFL from college for a lot of quarterbacks. So it doesn't matter. I mean, honestly, Bo Nix ran air raid at Oregon, right? Like, I mean, they could go a lot of different directions at quarterback, because Kliff Kingsbury has shown that you can pop in a reasonably talented quarterback in this offense and he'll have success, regardless of if he's an RPO guy, or is he a drop back passer, or is he a scrambler, or is he a straight running quarterback. He can do it. You can have success with any of those guys with this scheme. So that's exciting from my perspective, because there's just a lot. There's a lot of different directions you can go. It opens things up, and it doesn't dial you in. It's like, we have to target this quarterback because he fits this system. You can fit a lot of quarterbacks in this system, and I think that's great. So I didn't answer the question about what type of quarterback he likes, because I think he likes quarterbacks, and he'll make it work with whomever he gets.
Yep. I think the only requirement is that the quarterback is athletic, and all the top guys fit that narrative there.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. The thing I think, like, so you mentioned the different heights of you didn't mention it, but in the quarterbacks you were describing, they were all different heights. And I think that's an important factor too. Like, he doesn't scale to one height or another. He's worked with all heights. Jayden Daniels is 6'5". Drake May is 6'4", I think. Caleb is 6'1",
Baker's 6 feet tall.
Yeah, Baker's.
Well, the thing about the offense is one of the big things that he likes to do is the splits of the offensive line. They're a lot wider than they normally are, and the reason they do that is to open up passing lanes, so the quarterback doesn't have to see over the line, because the offensive line splits there's natural gaps in the protection that the quarterback can see through instead of having to see over. That was obviously huge for Kyler Murray in Arizona. And I don't think that Kingsbury is going to be locked into a Kyler Murray offense if he has Drake May or if he has Jayden Daniels. I think he's gonna switch it. There will be you were never going to see Kyler Murray line up under center, but I think if you bring in Jayden Daniels, he can do it. If you bring in Drake May, he can learn to do it. So there's a lot that you can do. Like I said, this offense is really good for a quarterback coming out of college into the NFL. It's a great transition offense.
Yep, absolutely. Mike, let's talk about the running backs that he's had and how he's used those guys.
So I don't want to bring up any of his college running backs because it's kind of pointless, to be honest with you, because of the way he runs his offenses in college compared to the way he ran it when he was in Arizona. So I'll focus on 3, and I'll go in chronological order, kind of. When he first arrived to Arizona, he had Kenyon Drake. one of my favorite fantasy running backs his first year in Arizona. Won a lot of money off that Bama. But he used them in a variety of ways, but used them more as a runner. And I know when we hear air raid, we think passing this, passing that. But Kenyon Drake had a 900-yard rushing season his first year in Arizona with Kingsbury. And I think it has something to do with Kyler Murray, but I really think it has more to do with the formation itself or the concepts themselves. When you worry so much about these deep passing attacks, you focus your defense so much on the back half, you forget, oh, shoot, they can actually run out the shotgun. And that's something that Kingsbury did a lot in Arizona. If you look up and run and play, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be on the shotgun, kind of because of what E said earlier. It just allows, the formation itself allows Kyler Murray to see the field better. It's just that simple. But that doesn't mean that he can't run his formations, his concept, out of other formations. He can line Kyler Murray up in a pistol. He even lined him up under center sometimes. It's just that for Kyler Murray, things seem to work better out of the shotgun position. But along with Kenyon Drake, he also had Chase Edmonds. Chase Edmonds was kind of the dual threat running back. In 2021, I believe he finished with about 700 yards rushing, I believe, and another 400 on the ground. So Edmonds had 1,000-yard all-purpose season in 2001 under Kingsbury. Also in 2021, it was the arrival of James Conner, who had a very good season under Kingsbury. And I kind of want to piggyback off of what Eric said. I don't think not only does he not have a specific quarterback that he would want to work with, I don't think he has a type of running back that he would want to work with either. You look at Drake, Edmonds, and Connor. 3 very good elusive running backs, but honestly, all 3 have different styles. So I really, really am intrigued on how the offense will look with Brian Robinson and Chris Rodriguez and whatever third running back they bring in, rather it be Antonio Gibson or even another rookie in the next draft. I do think Kingsbury can get, I wouldn't say the most out of his running backs, but he can definitely do enough to affect the running game greatly enhances the passing game. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Because he wants to pass the ball so much, he has to be able to run the ball. And he did a great job at that in Arizona, regardless of the air raid attack. They can still and will and have ran the ball under Kingsbury.
Yeah, I found an article for SI, and it was talking about the usage of running backs because, to your point, it was kind of given a myth and a factual statement about Kliff Kingsbury's offense, and people think with the air raid, the running backs are useless. And what it says is,
I was one of
actually,
those people.
Yeah, it says actually, if you're not versatile in the air raid and you're a running back, then you are useless. The back becomes a receiver or a blocker even more than in conventional attacks. They can split out wide to a receiver spot or run routes out of the backfield. The other piece that this goes into is sort of that running game that he likes to execute. And most of the time, those runs are directly through the A or they're splitting off the B gap, right? Or cutting off the B gap. That it brought to my mind, like, man, do we have a person that sort of fits that mold? Is that Brian Robinson Jr.? I think Brian Robinson Jr. was much more effective going around the edge than he was going up the middle. When he's going up the middle, his averages were relatively low, but he was good in the passing game. I don't know about being split out wide, but he was very good in the screen game. And I just wonder, like, do we have that versatile back that he's looking for? Or would he go get like a Bucky Irving, like we talked about before, from Oregon, maybe to be in that role, or the kid from USC? I'm not sure.
Forgot to mention this. The scheme that Brian Robinson ran with in Alabama is the same exact scheme that Kliff Kingsbury was running in Arizona. So just keep that in mind when fantasy season rolls around.
All right, we'll do. We'll do. You guys hit it pretty hard on the O line, so I'm not going to go into too much depth. In that same article I found, it says, one of the things was people think you have to be a gigantic offensive lineman in an air raid system. And they're like, they need to move. They can't just be big, right? You got to be able to move. There's double teaming, a power blocking scheme. There just isn't the wide run to the outside all the time with the lineman taking the bucket step and then sliding down the line of scrimmage. All the running comes between the A gap or the back choosing to cut off that B gap, like I just said. It's more between the tackles and not much time for moving linemen around. So, again, think about the kind of running back that you need that can run through the A and B gap. I think Chris Rodriguez was really, really effective at running out of the B gap. The A and B gap. I don't know if he was super effective in the pass game, though. So we kind of have a blend of the two things, but you don't want tells with your backs on the field, right? You don't want your back to identify what you're going to do. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there. From a tight end perspective, because I wanted to get into this too, because I consider tight ends part of the offensive line. The assumption is that they'd be running 4 receiver or 5 receiver sets all the time. That might be true often, but one of those receivers could be the tight end. And then when Kingsbury took over the Cardinals, they threw the tight ends only 56 times in 2019, but it had more to do with the personnel at the position with Charles Clay, Max Williams, Dan Arnold, and Darrell Daniels. They got Zach Ertz and threw it a total of 115, 108, and 86 times to the tight end in 3 seasons. So we need to upgrade at tight end before this starts. From a wide receiver perspective, I found this very interesting because I think there's some implications on what we do here. The top receivers in his system were Larry Fitzgerald, who we know is 6'3", I think, Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, he was not a small slot kind of guy. He was a big dude. And then he had DeAndre Hopkins. They traded for Hopkins from Houston, who had 1,400 yards, 6 touchdowns, etc. Hopkins is also, I think, well over 6 foot. I don't know the exact height on DeAndre Hopkins, but it was a number one receiver type system, or at least offense. And now some of that's based on the quarterback, right? Quarterback preference. But and that receiver just happened to get opening because, like Eric said, they kind of just throw into the open player. Hopkins is 6'1". Do we have a receiver on this roster that's going to be that number one guy in this offense? I don't know the answer to that question either. I don't think it's something that's going to be a massive priority. Because we have good receivers. I'm just curious if we have the type of receiver that has been successful in this offense historically. I'm looking up Terry McLaurin's height. I think he's listed at 6'1", but I don't think
he's 6 feet.
Yeah, I don't think I'd say McLaurin and DeAndre Hopkins are the same height to me. That seems off because Hopkins seems much bigger than McLaurin does to me. But
I hear what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, but I'll give McLaurin this. He plays way bigger than he actually is. And I know a lot of people say that about receivers. But seriously, think about the circus catches this man has made and the aggression that he has with his catches. I feel like if there's one player that should be happy to be playing in the air raid offense potentially, it's him. Because I think he's going to get a lot of one-on-one coverages deep this season. And rather it is Howell, May, Daniels, Williams, Nix, me, I might start at quarterback next season. Who knows? They're going to attack McLaurin deep this year, and that's going to be that alone has me excited for this season. I'm not going to lie, because I feel like McLaurin is like just itching to break out, and if he gets these chances deep down the field, he's going to connect on a lot of them. I feel
Jahan Dotson too, though. I mean, Jahan
him
Dotson
too.
fell off big time this year. The offense didn't do him any favors this year. He didn't do himself any favors either. But I think he's.
I really feel like both of them.
I think Jahan Dotson
too.
Yeah, he'll fit right in. He'll be good. Curtis Samuel could be back. That could be a big get. I mean, the receiving core was not utilized. Was underutilized last year. I don't know how else to put it. They just didn't have a great year in general. And it's not because they weren't good anymore. It's just because the way that the offense ran could have been the quarterback, could have been, the play calling. He just ran a lot of long developing plays, ran a lot of, it's just weird, right? And Terry McLaurin clearly wasn't happy in the offense. I think he'll be a lot happier in Kingsbury's offense because there should be more room to operate with the field being spread out the way that it is. And then I think they add a receiver in the draft if they don't bring Curtis Samuel back. So yeah, it'll be a fun year.
Yeah, I think don't be surprised if they do add a bigger body receiver at some point in the draft. Not to be the number one receiver. I think that's still Terry's spot, but we could see somebody be brought in as that third receiver who's more of a bigger body guy, along with our tight end upgrade. So all in all, with Kingsbury being announced as the offensive coordinator, Mike, let me know where you stand on this and how much you think it'll improve the offense over what we had with Bieniemy last year.
Oh, we finished 32nd. So it should be a bit better than 32nd, all things considered. And I really hate like bagging on EB the way it has to be. But I mean, the offense last year just was so underwhelming compared to what we saw in KC. And honestly, even at times what we saw under Scott Turner. With Scott Turner was more about consistency. He just didn't see it enough. With EB, it's like you saw the vision earlier in the season, and then sometime around the end of October, the beginning of November, it just completely fell apart for whatever reason. So with Kingsbury, I feel like we'll be at least average on offense. If we finish, I would say less than 20th, I'll be kind of surprised, to be honest with you. I really feel like this man is going to come here and say, oh, y'all must have forgot what I did the first time around in Arizona. Don't get me wrong. I know I wasn't the best head coach, but my offense was cooking, and I'm going to cook again. And unlike Arizona, I won't last. I mean, I will last the entire season and won't fade out when Call of Duty releases in November. That's an inside joke for those that know about the Kyler Murray, whatever.
Yeah, that's my concern with Kingsbury. You just kind of hit on it there, is that it wasn't even just in Arizona. It's like literally every year he coached at Texas Tech, it was the same thing. The defense faded at the end of the offense faded at the end of the year. The team faded down the stretch. Yeah, I mean, all the way back to Texas Tech, it was the same issue. So that's my biggest concern with him. I think in September and October, we're going to love him. We'll just have to see if that continues, because the trend is very real with Kingsbury. Now these were all seasons where he was the head coach. Maybe he just had too much on his plate. Maybe a lot of things went south, but it is a trend and it's going to have to be overturned. So that will be something to monitor for sure with this offense, is can it produce from September into January and beyond? That's going to be a big deal, because it to date has not under Kliff Kingsbury.
And I think there's two contributing factors to that. I heard somebody say one of them earlier this week. I wish I remember who to give them credit, but the first one is weather. When you're running a very speed and tempo offense, weather can impact that. So as the weather goes south, so then does your speed in your offense, especially in outdoor situations. The second thing, and this is what I heard somebody else say, was you're running that up tempo offense all the time. Number one, players start to get a little bit tired of that. Their bodies wear down a little bit because of the just constant hurry up aspect of it. Number two, defenses catch on to what you are trying to do every time. And eventually they figure out your pace and they figure out ways to slow you down in your offense. And then you're kind of just a normal average offense at that standpoint. Same thing with sort of that Chip Kelly system. Remember, Chip Kelly was the same exact way. Like, you come blow the doors off, eventually the NFL is going to adjust to what you're doing. And that's going to be true of Kingsbury too. But what does his base offense do when the NFL does adjust? That is going to be the thing that he's going to have to answer, that we're going to see starting in November and December of this upcoming season. So Xavier Leggett, we talked about him in our mock draft situation from South Carolina, would be a phenomenal addition to this receiving core.
He should be there in the second round too.
Yes,
so
it'll
be fun. That's who I would love to see with one of those 2 second round picks.
Yep, 6'3", 220 or something like that. Big dude.
230.
230
speed.
Yep. He could be a Julio. All right, Mike, give me your final thoughts on both on our coaching situation as a whole.
I know we shot for the moon but I really feel like we landed on the stars. I know that was cliche and corny, but real talk. I understand we wanted the young, explosive offensive coordinator and Ben Johnson, or the young hot shot and Mike McDonald. And apparently we may have offered McDonald. I'm still like iffy on that. Like nobody's really like come and confirmed it, but I think there's murmurs that we offered Mike McDonald the head coaching job, and he just took Seattle because they paid him more. But with Dan Quinn, Kliff Kingsbury, Joe Witt, I feel like you have 3 experienced coaches that know what the heck they're doing. I don't know if we could say that about our previous coaches. I'm not trying to take a shot at them, but I mean, when they were with us for 4 seasons, and yeah, nothing popped off. So I'm feeling a bit more confident about the team and the organization as a whole this time around, compared to how I felt last year around this time. So I'm excited. Like I said, like you see my headline, I like it. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I like it, and I'm just ready to move on to free agency.
Coming in March. Eric, final thoughts?
Yeah, very excited. I do look forward to seeing what how the rest of the coaching staff shakes out. That'll be something to watch. I think the team will look very different next year. And everybody wanted that mad scientist type coach, and I think we got it. Like I think Dan Quinn is that. Not on offense obviously, but defensively, we've seen what his defenses are capable of. And the dynamic here is already a little different because he's got the 2 big guys in the middle, which he didn't really have his defense. And one knock on his defense in Dallas is it was really small. Not the case here. So that is going to be it's going to be interesting to see how all of this unfolds. But I do believe the team looks very different coming in 2024. I'm excited to see it. And I cannot wait to get it on the field. But we've got a long way to go before then. So looking forward to draft season and mock draft season and free agency and all that good stuff that's coming up. But the team is going to look completely different, and I'm excited for it.
Yep. My take is this. I don't think I'm excited about any one of the individual components. But like I said before, the sum of the individual parts has me intrigued. I think with Adam Peter making the decisions for Dan Quinn's player personnel needs, and Dan Quinn trusting his coordinators to run the football operations on a day-to-day basis in terms of coaching, positions, players, technique, and implementing the offense and the defense. I think that type of structure is not something we've had here in I don't know when. It's probably since what, Bobby Beathard or something like that. Maybe what's the other guy's name? Charlie Casserly, where you had that sort of like the coordinators had that autonomy. The coach could focus on being the head coach, and your GM could focus on picking players along with the scouting department. It's been a very long time since we had that. And don't tell me about Scott McLuhan and Jay Gruden. It didn't work. I don't like it. But we're going to see. We're going to see. I will be optimistic because of the sum of the parts. None of the hires really blew me out of the water. But I think there could be something good that comes of this, especially with what we do at the number 2 pick. We got to get a quarterback. There's, to me, and I see this on social media, like we're going to roll. Let's roll with Hal and collect picks. And Ron Rivera tried that already, right? He tried that already. And that was a fatal flaw in his operation. Like, look, Hal's a good guy, but we got to get somebody who's of that upper echelon if we're ever going to get over this hump. That's just the way it is in the NFL. So if they can do that and they commit to that, I'm willing to give anybody a chance. Let's see what comes out of this. We'll bring you all kinds of updates and information as we go, folks that are listening and watching. We appreciate you guys. Make sure you are subscribed. You're locked in. Tell a friend to tell some friends, and we'll be back at you next week. Commanders Declassified, we are out of here.